Welcome to today's webinar, your AI Teaching Toolkit. It's a Q&A session. It's a Q&A session on innovation in education. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Paul Cotter. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at Stukent, and I'm so excited to be hosting this event today. Before we dive in, let's get familiar with the chat feature. Go ahead and use the chat feature and let us know where you're watching from today. Let us know which university you're with. We'd love to hear from you. We want this session to be interactive today. We've designed it so that you have pre-submitted questions, and we've compiled those questions, and we'll get those answered. But if you have anything that pops up, feel free. And if David has time, he can answer that question. So just to look at the chat, hi to Keenan. Hi. Oh man, it's going really fast. Sorry, it's hard for me to read. Brandy from Chicago. Catherine, welcome. Elena from Chicago State University. Tom from University of Maine. Welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here. We had a really great response to this webinar, so we know that everyone's really eager to get through this and see what our questions are today. But before we start, I want to ask you a question. Did you know that Stukent requires all of its authors to update their courseware every single year? That means that many of our offerings at Stukent already contain AI course material. So as a special gift to all of you today for attending, we want to offer you free instructor access to some of our courses and Simternships that already include and emphasize AI in their curriculum. These all-in-one bundles are designed to help you bring cutting-edge, real-world learning into the classroom. And we do this by immersive simulations that give students hands-on and practical experience. We do this, like I said, with courseware that's updated annually. We do it with engaging assignments that are auto-graded quizzes also, and real-world case studies and projects that connect classroom and theory to practical application. So go ahead and click on the link below and request your free trial, your free instructor access, so that you can check out this courseware. We also have on this landing page that you'll click to some AI resources that you can use in the classroom. So be sure and take advantage of that today. Now, while you're taking a second to request access, I want to introduce our speaker, David Joyner, and invite him to the stage. David Joyner is Associate Dean of Off-Campus and Special Initiatives and Executive Director of Online Education and Online Masters at Georgia Tech's College of Computing, where he also holds the Zvi Galil Peace Chair. He has authored several dozen papers and 4 books on computer science education, teaching at scale, and AI for learning. Joyner has received the 2023 Georgia Tech Outstanding Professional Education Award and the 2019 USG Regents Teaching Excellence Award for online teaching. He was also named to the Georgia Tech Alumni Association's 40 Under 40 in 2022. Welcome, David.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I want to start out and just give you a minute to introduce yourself. Tell us a little about who you are and your experience with AI. And then after that, we'll get into the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. My name is David Joyner. This is my cat, Rosie. Oh, I used to try and get out of the room when I did things like this. And then I discovered everyone likes to see a cat. I'm mildly insulted by her yawn while you're reading my intro, but I'm sure it's nothing personal. So I work at Georgia Tech. I'm a research associate there. I got my start in AI and education during my dissertation. And so my dissertation was on AI and education, and especially at the middle school level at the time. And when we were wrapping up, when I was wrapping up my PhD, Georgia Tech was partnering with a company called Udacity to do an online Master of Science in Computer Science program. And my advisor wanted to do a course in it. And they said, who do you want to work with you on it? And I figured I'd do that for a year and then move on to whatever was next. And what I found out in the process was I actually loved teaching online. I loved working in online education. It had a really nice overlap with AI in education because during my dissertation work, at least, the hardest thing I did was not build a platform or build any software or build an AI agent. The hardest thing I had to do was get permission to go into a classroom and have people use the things that I built. That was far more difficult than going into the class every day and having them use things. Online, I found everyone was already, online anyway. And so integrating AI tools into the curriculum and integrating these things in different places was far smoother because you were already in an environment where you could do that. This was back in 2015. So it's been a really interesting few years for us because we were doing online education, AI and education, back then. Online education was not new, but it was the MOOC movement, the massive open online course movement was going on at the time. And so it's this kind of renewed push and some renewed pedagogy around how you teach online with new technologies. And then COVID hit and suddenly everyone cared about online education. And then ChatGPT landed and everybody cared about AI in education. And so it's been an interesting few years. It's been a humbling few years because, in some ways we were kind of ahead of the game to know, we were doing this for a while before, but then to see all the amazing things people created once there was so much more attention and inertia behind it has been humbling as well. So it's been a fun time. Nowadays I tend to say that my passion is for online education as a way of getting greater access, greater accessibility, greater affordability, reaching more people. And AI in education is what I do by necessity there as well. There's still some things I'm really excited about in AI in education, but some of the things that have happened recently really have us also being forced to adjust to it as much as proactively using it, which has been interesting to go through. And we'll talk about a few of those things there. So I became acquainted with Stukent from a student of mine. And so I've been really interested in seeing across a lot of different companies, a lot of different platforms, the way AI is starting to solve the problems it created. And created is a strong word, but the very same things that many instructors complain about with AI, new things like Stukent are coming out that kind of address some of those things and let us use AI to create experiences that are much more dynamic experiences, much more engaging, and as a happy side effect, also are harder to cheat on with AI. And so it's been an exciting time. So I'm excited to chat about some of these things. When they asked me what to talk about, I suggested a Q&A format because, I think with everything that's been happening in AI education, it's also been interesting that you see various different levels of expertise and familiarity. And it's always hard to know what kind of audience you're going to be talking to. And so I wanted to leave it a little bit more open. So I've got the chat open on my screen. In fact, I'm going to see if I can make it even bigger. Yeah, I made it bigger. So feel free as well to chime in with questions as we go forward, and I will see them over y'all's probably right shoulder. And yeah.
Great. Well, awesome. Thanks for sharing that information about yourself. And so what we did is we asked people to submit their questions that they have about AI, and we've compiled those. And we've got a big list. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive in and get started. So the first question is, how is AI transforming traditional teaching methods, and could it eventually replace them?
Yeah, no, so one of my soapboxes is about a lot of teachers are tired of hearing about AI. And one of the reasons why is because a lot of the conversations about it end up with this kind of existential threat kind of thread of, is it going to replace all of us? My own personal opinion, just to lead with the interesting question, is the day when AI can replace teachers and replace teaching methods is the day when we have to have much bigger conversations anyway. I think teaching is one of the hardest things there is to do. And in designing AI for teaching, that was one thing that I confronted, is we borrowed a lot of analogies and lessons from healthcare and other fields. But teaching, more than anything else, I think what you're really trying to improve is invisible. And making it visible is extremely difficult. The day when AI can come along and teach as well as a human teacher can is the day when there will be questions of what we even teach, because whatever it was teaching was going to be easier than the process of teaching it. So will that day come one day? I'm not going to say no, because the technological progress has told us never to say no to anything. I think it's much further out than some of the places you're here. And I think a lot of it comes from a misunderstanding of what teaching really is. Where AI thrives in transforming traditional teaching methods is in really expanding an access to a much more dynamic and robust experience across various different ways. So it's really an instance of kind of learning at scale, which is my field, but it scales it across a lot of different dimensions. It scales in terms of the amount of access a student has access to, or the amount of attention, the amount of control and interaction a student can have with these things. That it's always available, it's always there, it's tireless, it's infinite patience, everything like that. So it kind of expands the tutoring angle out to be available to everyone, as well as kind of scales across lots of different fields, lots of different levels. That's where I've been really excited seeing it. And I really think it has the potential to usher in a golden age of informal learning, where it's no longer necessary, if you want to learn about a topic, to go find a class at your local community college or major in that at school, but really to just say, hey, I'm interested in learning about the solar system. Let's go chat with AI about it and find out about it, and to drive the conversation in your direction and ask the follow-up questions and say things like, I didn't really understand that. Can you make it more at the level of myself at this, at this level? My daughter uses a tool for AI at school, which is related to something we'll talk about in a bit. But I've seen that exact kind of thing happen, is that they have the ability to give assignments in AI and say, your assignment is to have a conversation with AI about this topic, but they have the option of just saying, create a new conversation unaffiliated with an assignment. And she uses it all the time in ways that I like. It'd be very possible to use it in ways I don't like, of, do my homework for me, things like that. And part of it is that she's young enough that she's, not at the age where she's turning in, 2-page typed essays or anything like that. But it's been encouraging to me to see that she's still using it for things like, I'm curious to learn more about this. And so very much the same way, when search engines first started to become popular, that we would, start to just search for things instead of having to go to the library and find a book or find an expert. There's a great bit on How I Met Your Mother about the transition of knowledge and how there used to be, big arguments at restaurants over trivia that wasn't easy to look up the answer to. And now you're just like, oh, there's the answer. But it's very similar to that kind of thing. We're seeing it evolve in that way, but with much more power behind it, because you can tailor it up and down. So I think it's got that potential to be a really amazing tool, especially for informal learning. I do think it's the case that so much of education is not just about learning. And I think that's for good and bad. But education is more about, it's about assessment, it's about community, it's about the social kind of engagement around the content. There's so many things that go into it beyond just the learning process. And I do think it has a lot of potential to transform a lot of those things, but in ways that aren't necessarily as fundamentally antithetical to the way we've done things in the past as some people would have you believe. I think there's lots of room for us to design really good engaging activities, really good assignments that use AI to create a more interactive experience, but still kind of stay true to the underlying idea of, our goal is for you to demonstrate your knowledge and to improve your knowledge through the process of demonstrating it. So I'm seeing a lot of things like that. Stukent, again, is a great example. I should say I haven't actually used Stukent in my classes because I teach computer science, so I'm in a different field. But I've been really excited to see the kinds of things it does in that area, and they're not paying me for any of this. I'm saying this just out of the goodness of my own, or out of my own perception. But it really is kind of echoing the idea that we can create the kind of experiences that historically have been really hard to scale. Another one here at Georgia Tech is something called Socratic Mind that was created here. It's AI-driven oral assessment. So kind of the same idea of using generative AI to create a more back and forth learning experience. And what I love about it, it's created in some ways for integrity purposes of, it's kind of like proctoring, but it's lower weight proctoring. But what I really love about it is that I can ask students questions through it. And if the question has 4 things I want them to cover and they cover 3 of them, instead of it being submit your assignment, you got 25% of the grade off, and now you get 75 and that's the end of it. It's able to ask, okay, so you covered that. What do you think about this? And it kind of can prompt them and give them some room to say. And for a lot of students, it'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't think about covering that. I knew it. I just didn't know to register it. It can still inform some of the grade and things like that. But you're able to build those kind of assessments that are back and forth. Or you can build assessments that are really kind of interactive in the sense that students can drive it the way they want to. So you could have an assessment that's, talk about your reasoning behind writing this code. And one student might say, well, I remember doing a similar function on this other topic, and so I figured out how to do it this way. Or another might say, well, I realized early on I need to use this kind of data structure. And they can drive it that way, and it can be built interactively in that way. So I think a lot of what I'm excited to see about AI transforming traditional teaching is it's not undoing anything we do. It's making it easier to do a lot of things we do. They built Socratic Mind in large part to scale oral assessment online because we teach very, very large classes in our program. But even in person, you don't do an oral assessment 3 times a week because that's just a whole lot of time to put into it. But if you're having AI do a lot of the work on it, you're able to scale it up in that way as well. But even in a smaller class, you can have them do an exercise, every couple of days after class to get that kind of formative learning experience much more built in. So that's where I'm excited to see it. It hasn't showed us anything that we didn't know about how learning works, in my opinion, at least. But it's given us the ability to build experiences that do what we know works a lot better, a lot faster, and a lot more often.
Great. Thank you for those insights, David. The next question is, what are the most effective ways to integrate AI into college courses without compromising educational quality?
Yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of a kind of opportunistic drive for AI in education, and it's been interesting to see just how different places adopt it. In a lot of ways, it goes back to the history of the development of different fields, because it comes from different places depending on whose attention it caught first. One analogy, though, that came out of some colleagues at MIT was Justin Reich. So first of all, I'll plug something else. Justin Reich at MIT has a book called Failure to Disrupt. That is the book I recommend anybody working in this field to read, because it really goes through in great detail with great insights why technology often struggles to impact real educational practice. And so often it's the case that we come up with these great ideas, this is exactly how learning works. I can build this thing, and it runs into some realities of the way schools work and the way kind of the overall kind of that distinction between education and learning and the way the overall education industry kind of operates. And it gives some insights into how to penetrate through to that. But Justin and his colleagues at MIT have this notion of adopted versus arrival technologies. And it's a really great, I think, analogy for understanding more of what's going on in this area. An adopted technology is one that we as schools, as organizations, as companies, as governments, whatever, go out and say, we're going to adopt this technology. This is a thing we're going to use, and now everyone has it. The way we do learning management systems is like this. We say, we're going to adopt Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle or whatever it is, and that's going to be what we're going to use as a school. Then there are arrival technologies, which are those things that happen to us that we're forced to adjust to. So when all our students suddenly had smartphones in their pockets, that was an arrival technology. That was something we had to adjust to. When our students all had Google at home and could Google search things instead of having to go find the encyclopedia or go find the papers, that was an arrival technology. And I think this speaks to a lot of the way we make sense of this, because these do kind of give us a distinction of how we address some of these things. So much of our work as teachers, I think, so far has been adjusting to AI as an arrival technology. It's been, hey, all my students woke up on November 23rd or whatever date it was, and suddenly they all had the world's most powerful AI in their pocket. That's a big adjustment to make. And I honestly, kudos to all of us who are still doing this 2.5 years later, because it's been a big adjustment. I like to say, imagine if all your students woke up with an iPhone fully connected on their bedside table back in 2005. That's the kind of adjustment we just went through. And so a lot of what we're doing is in that area. And so I think a lot of the questions about how we integrate it fall into that kind of area, because we're dealing with it as an arrival technology. We're dealing with it as my students all have access to this. Some are more confident than others. Some are using it more than others, everything like that. So how do I adjust to that? And that's a big challenge. I recommend for that one, having a very clear AI policy. Maybe I'm an optimist about this. I do think most of our students still want to learn well, and they want to accomplish what we want them to accomplish and everything like that. It's just that they need to have transparent guidelines on what is allowed and what is not allowed. So I think having a very clear policy, and policy is even too legalistic a word, very clear kind of guidance on, here's how AI can help you in this context. Here's how AI could be too helpful. You could over rely on it. So being transparent about that with students, I think, is very helpful. But I think where we'll see more impact is when we treat it more as a adopted technology. And we're really seeing this as a feedback cycle. I think the advancements made in AI have allowed companies to come along and now build on that familiarity and build on that technology and things like that to create things that we can now adopt more proactively. I mentioned my daughter's school is doing one of these things. And what's great about it is that, when students are just using ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini, whatever else on their own, we're always kind of in the dark about where things are coming from and what access they have and what comfort they have. And so we have to kind of be a one-size-fits-all approach. when we bring it in as a first class object and say, hey, everyone is assigned to use AI on this assignment in this way, then we're able to start to be a lot more deliberate about how we use it. We're able to build learning experiences that assume it instead of just giving some students an advantage. And we're able to actually see how students are using it. So the great thing about that tool and some others out there is they take those interactions with AI that are otherwise happening somewhere off the grid, not off the grid fully, but off of our grid, and they bring it into the classroom as an actual learning object. One of my early pieces of feedback or advice to teachers about dealing with this wave of conversational AI on education is just to ask your students to turn in assignments with the edit history enabled, not as like a fully integrity check. It serves that purpose too, but not just as an integrity check of, did you copy in your entire essay or did you write it here, but also to allow you to give them some process feedback, to be able to say, hey, you started on page 1, you wrote straight through to the end. Your essay is kind of disorganized. It's hard to follow in some places, and you had a great point here, but it would have been good to bring it up here. And this is all because it doesn't look like you started with an outline. So you didn't know where you're going when you started. And because I can see the process, I can say, I can tell that was the issue because I can see how you went about composing this. Whereas for somebody else, you're able to say, great job. You start with an outline. You fleshed it out in these ways. I can see how you created this. AI is letting us go even further with that with some modern tools, actually letting us have the conversation with AI be part of that learning deliverable. So we can say, hey, here's your work. Here's the conversation you had with AI at the same time, because I assigned you to do this in a platform that had that enabled. And based on this interaction that I've seen, it looks like you just borrowed ideas from AI. You didn't add anything to it. And whether I penalize you that in an integrity way or not, what I can say is, going forward, if you're not able to do anything that AI couldn't do on its own, then you're not going to be able to contribute anything. You want to get to the point where you can contribute more than AI can do on its own, and look at what you contributed compared to what the AI did. Then for somebody else, you can say, hey, you got a great idea from AI right there. You built on it really nicely. You had a good conversation exploring that idea. You caught where it hallucinated that, and it was wrong about that. And so we could treat that as a first-class learning object as well. So those are the two broad things I recommend. One is when you're dealing with it, students using AI on their own, and it, and you're kind of okay with it, but you don't have a lot of control over it, to have transparent policies that say, here's how I would like you to use AI, here's how you shouldn't use it, here's how to make sure you're using it well. And then whenever possible, to bring it in and say, this is a thing you are going to use on this assignment. And because I'm requiring it, I can evaluate and give you feedback on how you're using it. So in a lot of ways, the calculator analogy, I think, is trite at this point, but it carries a lot of weight. In a lot of ways, it's what we do with calculators of, hey, when you do your math homework at home, don't use your calculator to solve every single problem, because I want you to understand how this works. But once you're done with those problems, use it on these, because on these, you'll be able to do more stuff with the calculator than you could do just by hand. We're doing the same kind of thing, just with a much more powerful and flexible tool.
Yeah. Those are some great suggestions in implementing guidelines or policies that can help in education. The third question is, how can we balance the benefits of AI with the need for students to put in effort and truly learn? I think you kind of just talked a little bit about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the key thing for students in that transparency angle is they need to understand, in my opinion at least, most of us are fully on board, especially the kind of people who would attend something like this. I do think it's interesting that part of the challenge with many of these things is the people who need to hear more about AI in education and who need to hear that they are on the right track about things and their hesitations are valid are very often people who don't come to things that are about AI in education. So I had the privilege of giving a talk at the Council of Southern Graduate Schools a few weeks ago, and it was a perfect audience for this because it was people who were not going to go out of their way to come to something on AI, and so getting their perspectives was fantastic. But it really comes down. So I think for people watching this, chances are we're on board with using AI in some ways, and we just want to figure out ways to use it wisely. For me, for students, it's really helping them understand we want you to use AI as a learning assistant, not as a doing assistant. We want you to use it to help you learn and make sure that what you're getting out of it is internalized into your own mind, so that when you go off to do something on your own, you know it. If you're using it as a doing assistant, if you're using it to help you do the assignment, not learn the content necessary to do the assignment, then you're not developing your own understanding. And there will be assignments where using AI is part of learning, and learning to use it effectively on an assignment is a good thing. So same way, learning to solve a particular kind of calculus problem with a TI-83, there is still a learning assistant because it's helping you learn about the topic and learn how to solve the problem with the calculators. That can be okay. But it's about being clearly articulating what we want them to learn out of these things. I deal with this in one of my classes. So I mostly teach in our online MSCS program, which it's online, it's asynchronous, it's very large. 87% of our students are working full time, many of them are already in software. And so our classes involve a lot of coding. And we have an issue sometimes where we'll tell a student, hey, this assignment does not let you copy code from anywhere else. And we found that, this big part of your code was copied from somewhere on Stack Overflow, somewhere on the internet. And the response we'll sometimes get is, I do that at work all the time. Why can't I do that here? And the response is, at work, your role is to do. Here, your role is to learn. There, they probably don't care where you got the code and how you built it and things like that, with some caveats on, it needs to be secure. And if you copy in some code that has something malicious in it, you're on the hook for it. But aside from those kind of things, they probably don't care, because what you're tasked with doing is building a thing that works and works reliably and works at scale and getting it done as fast as possible. For us, you're writing code to demonstrate that you understand some content. So the writing process is meant to be representative of what you know, not just a thing that we wanted you to build on its own. And so I think AI has the same kind of distinction of, you need to understand, we're not asking you to generate a 5-page essay on the causes of World War II, because we really need an essay on the causes of World War II. What we need is to check to see if you understand the causes of World War II. There will be plenty of places out in the world where you can probably use AI to just generate something, because it really is about the content, not about the process of what it represents. But understanding when that is really important. And I think it's also a place where we have to be able to get into that conversation with students, because that authenticity angle is going to be such a key factor in a lot of AI generated stuff. So we want them to understand, when can I use AI to generate something and have it actually accomplish its purpose? And when will it superficially accomplish its purpose, but won't actually accomplish what it's supposed to do?
Nice. That's a great distinction between learning and doing. I like that. The next question we have is, what are some emerging AI tools that educators should be aware of for this coming year, especially when we're interested in how we can help students use AI as a study buddy rather than a shortcut?
Yeah, absolutely. So I never know how far to get mentioning specific tools. But because we asked this, I'll mention. So I keep mentioning, like, my daughter's school uses a tool called Flint that's been fantastic for making it's the interface is very similar to any kind of other conversational interface, but makes it so it brings it into the enterprise licensing and enterprise kind of account provisioning, so that you can go in and see the conversations your students have. I think anything in that kind of ilk that takes it from something that students are registering for on their own and makes it something that they're getting through the school is powerful. And this is not unusual. This is the same kind of pipeline we've walked down, or the same kind of pathway we walked down in the past. Many of our students have email addresses on their own, and then they enroll at our school, and we give them an email address. And it's because by giving them an official one through us, we recognize there's a lot of stuff we can do. We can look them up in a directory. We can have official policies about what you check. We can provision it and scan for whatever. So by bringing it in kind of as a first class thing, you're able to do more. I think we'll see the same kind of thing with AI. My honest dream is that in the not too distant future, instead of having email addresses, we will all have an AI agent. And when you need to ask me a question or talk to me, you first chat with my AI, not as a kind of a filter, an intermediary, of like a gatekeeper, but as a, hey, instead of waiting for David to catch up on email for once in his life, why don't I go ahead and tell you, hey, this is the way he usually answers this question. And okay, you're asking for an extension on an assignment. You should know that David generally requires you to go through the Dean of Students office and get a note that verifies your excuse. You can get that response instantly. And then if you get to a point where you go through and the question cannot be answered by AI, it becomes an email message, the same kind of way. So, AI suggests to me, the ways to autocomplete a message. It's not very good at it, in my humble opinion yet, but I've also not tried to set it up to be good at it yet. I feel like if I actually put some attention into it, I could probably build it to be pretty good at that. instead of waiting for me to get the message and giving me the suggested replies, why doesn't it just tell the person immediately, say, hey, these are the replies I'm probably going to suggest to David. Maybe your answer is in here, maybe not, but you got the immediate reply. Anyway, sorry, I digress about that. So anything that brings it in as a first class thing, I think is powerful. We've used another one called Visible AI that is that kind of same thing as well, that it builds a conversational agent into the assignment composition interface. And so what I as an instructor can do is see the process of here's what you wrote, here's the conversation you had, and here's how you went back and forth with it. And here's a reanimated, not zombie-ish, but like a recreated, replayed version of creating your essay. So I can give you feedback on that process. And as an additional side effect, I can also say, hey, 5 paragraphs of your essay appeared out of nowhere. Where did those come from? Maybe maybe you were offline working in Microsoft Word and you were on an airplane and have internet. But it's at least an indicator of if it's a lot of content appearing all at once, and it has some other indicators of AI. It at least gives me a little bit more to go on. I saw a question in the chat as well from Dr. Bajan about detecting AI usage and turn-ins detector, and I'll say none of the AI text detectors are very accurate, and they never will be very accurate. And that's not a criticism of the companies. That's a fundamental comment on the task of detecting AI-generated text is much harder than the task of generating AI text. And the reason is because AI text is programmatically, mathematically designed to be statistically indistinguishable from the majority of other text out there. So you're trying to identify text that by definition was made to not be dissimilar from other text out there. So they'll never be very effective because they just have a much harder challenge to go through. So where I think we can make a lot of progress is by creating assignments where a student can't just copy in a bunch of content from AI and have that check off any boxes. Stukent's kind of dynamic internship kind of approach is one example of that. Of you're not, in my opinion, no student's going to sit there just copying and pasting back and forth to an AI, constantly, especially if you have things that are built to be a little bit more immediate, a little bit less copy pastable, more video based and things like that. You might have your extremely dishonest students who are going to go the extra mile and like turn on the thing that lets the AI see their entire screen and do things. And I think that's the modern equivalent of that student who would print out notes on the inside of their soda bottle, so they would see little formulas on their water bottle when they're taking an exam. If you're going to go that far to cheat, then you were going to do whatever you had to. But for the vast majority of our students who are looking to be honest, but are aware of little opportunistic things where they imagine their other classmates are doing to get ahead, those are the kind of things we can avoid with some of this better design. I think also we talk a lot about AI for learning. A big place where AI can really help out is helping out us teachers. AI is really good at many of the things that we don't like to do. And so it can be really good at helping us streamline some of the kind of more routine processes. I'm a big, is cynic the right word? A big opponent, there we go, that's the word. Opponent of purely AI grading. So except for places where the answers are so well formed that we could have done AI grading 20 years ago. Like when I was an undergrad, we had an AI grading platform that was intelligent enough to recognize things like, hey, you're off by a factor of 10. Maybe you divided by 10 somewhere, which, technically is AI in some semblance. But except for those places where the answers are so well formed that you can be very objective about it, I tend to be a pretty big opponent of purely AI grading, partially because I don't think it will ever be as effective in the long run. I think we've seen studies about, this AI grader is just as effective as a human grader in this area, which is fine when you're testing students who didn't think they were going to get graded by an AI. As soon as they're aware of that, it opens up a lot more room to figure out, oh, this AI or this grader really just wants to see these keywords. So just grab a bunch of keywords from the textbook, sprinkle them in your essay. It doesn't matter if you said anything that has merit. That's what it's looking for. And people will figure out how to game those in different ways. But even if they didn't, even if it was perfectly accurate, in my opinion, grading is not just an exercise of saying, hey, you accomplished what I wanted you to accomplish on the assignment, you get an A. It's also that social sense of a person, an expert in this field, has approved my work and has written this feedback, and they've seen it, and I made a connection, even if it's across time and across space, with another person who looked at my work and liked it. The idea that an AI looked at my work and liked it, I don't think has the same the same kind of power. It has a different power. You know, there is something to be said for this AI looked at 1 million essays and it thought mine was one of the 1% best. That's cool, but it's a different kind of power. And I think that we can't lose the social element, especially if we lose it transparently, or if we don't lose it transparently. The worst things, I think, are where a student thinks that a teacher wrote some comments, gave them a grade, and doesn't know that the teacher didn't, that it came from an AI. And that loss of trust, that loss of authenticity is far worse than anything that would happen from that. But there are tools out there that really help teachers to keep that authenticity angle, but yet still help us out. There's a tool called GradeWiz that I was in kind of the venture capital phase that is looking at, can I have an AI assistant that takes all the assignments and organizes them for me and says, hey, David, here are the 20 people who seem to not, didn't mention Lusitania as a cause of the breakout of the war. Maybe you want to write some feedback for them. And here are the ones who had this kind of error. And here are the ones who had this kind of error. And lets me kind of approach it at a big, high level. And to know, okay, the 25% of the class that all got that wrong, I probably explained something badly there. I need to revise my lecture for next time to cover that. The 5% that got that wrong, okay, maybe they overlooked that kind of stage. And lets me be a lot more top-down, gave me a bird's eye view of the patterns of student errors. And also lets me do kind of the tedious stuff of, okay, I'm halfway through grading and I've been giving everyone 10% off for this error, but you know what? That's kind of harsh. Maybe I should downgrade that to 5 instead of going back through all my essays and saying, never mind. It just says, modify all those grades, kind of like Gradescope did as well. So I think there's tools like that. I think the big thing with emerging tools is that very little of education is built to be agile in this area. For us, at least, when we want to procure a big new tool, it's a several-month process. I can't say that the things we're going to want to buy 18 months from now are the things that are available right now, because AI is just moving that quickly. And so we have to find new models for procuring tools. I do think it's also the case that as schools, we're in an interesting position because we are in this place where so much has happened so fast and there's suddenly so much power available to anyone who will create an OpenAI account and drop in their card to pay for new credits, that there are places who really want to get in to make a quick impact. And so in some ways, schools are in the position of being a bit more picky and choosy. I think about who we choose to work with, because there are plenty of people out there doing very similar things. So we can leverage that kind of angle and find places where we can be a bit quicker to experiment with things.
That was great. Lots of good suggestions there. And in the chats, there's people offering what they use it for to help them with teaching. So that's kind of cool too, to read those. The next question is, how can we teach students to use AI ethically and responsibly in both academic and professional settings?
Yeah, and I think this is a tough question, in part because I don't know if there's even, I don't think we've reached an agreement in general about what that even means. I know people, and I don't disagree with these people, who have basically said, I don't want anything to do with it because either the energy cost is so high and it's going to kill the earth, or because basically all these things came from all these books and works of art and things like that the authors did not agree to have be in the training set. And it's unethical fundamentally. And so I refuse to use it. And I think that there's another one of the analogies I like for AI in a lot of ways is actually automobiles. I think AI, among all the technologies out there, is going to end up being most similar to automobiles. And it applies to the ethical debate as well, that if you drive, you're dealing with the fact that you're producing carbon going into the atmosphere, having an effect. And you have to either ignore or do the mental calculus of why that's justifiable. If you drive an electric car, you have to deal with the strip mining and everything like that goes into those kind of things, as well as whatever else is going on. And so there's things like that go into the AI as well, that you have to be aware of what it means to use these. And the things I said earlier about requiring students to use AI, I think that is an important thing to have, because you will have students, or ideally you should have students, I think. If you don't have students who will ever think this, then we're not doing a very good job of communicating it. I do think there are explanations, but there's enough that this should be a conversation. Who will basically say, how dare you require me to use that? We've encountered this in other places as well, of, there's certain tools out there that I would like to use in my classes, but they require a Google account. And I'll encounter people who will say, I refuse to sign up for a Google account because I'm opposed to what the company does. And how do you deal with that? I'm not going to require students to do that. I think if we want to really require it, we have to be ready to have these conversations. I don't have strong answers, but we have to be able to have our explanation, which very often is going to boil down to the idea of, every technology has problematic things in its past. This is one that's going to remain around, and we have to adjust to it. If you're not able to deal with it, then you're not going to be able to keep up. By being someone who is informed about these issues, but is still qualified to use it and understands how it works, you will be in a position to inch things along for good. You'll be in the position to say, how do we design an agent that's just as powerful, but only operates on stuff we were deliberately given permission to train on? How do we drive down the energy costs of some of these tools? You have to understand how they work in order to be in those conversations. So I think we have to make sure students are aware of that it's not just a magic box that has no costs, no problematic history. Everything does. Aside from that, so once we get past the kind of the ethical issues of using it in general, then we get to kind of responsible usage as well, and responsible usage for learning and for practice. In my classes, at least, we've had an interesting phenomenon where my classes have a lot of essays to them, which there's a comment online somewhere that says, you're in a David Joyner class, you're going to do a lot of writing. I think the student meant that as a criticism. I took it as a compliment. But it did mean with ChatGPT coming out and everything like that, we've dealt with this a lot more keenly because these are the exact kind of assignments that we deal with. And so we had a lot of conversations about how do we adjust to that? What are we seeing? What patterns are we seeing? I have the benefit of having a whole big team of TAs who work on these classes who can see the patterns across classes and across semesters and see how things are changing over time. And what ultimately we've mostly decided is we can't penalize it at the level of an integrity violation. We can't say, I know you used AI and therefore you get a 0 on assignment, even though the policy says you can't copy from AI. I say my heuristic for it is, if you're going to use AI as an assistant, chat with it, brainstorm with it, then put it away, and then open your work, and never have the two open at the same time. And that guarantees anything you get from AI is filtered through your own understanding, rather than just being the AI as a doing assistant instead of a learning assistant. That's gotten harder to do because now when I open up, a new Microsoft, Word document, the first thing it says is, hey, how can Copilot help you today? It's the modern Clippy. So it's gotten harder to do that. But I think the heuristic still applies, is keep your AI and your deliverable separate. But what we've mostly found is that we're not penalizing it on the level of, hey, you used AI, therefore you get a 0, except for in some particularly egregious cases. If you left in the language of the prompt, or where ChatGPT says at the end, I think this will be a great essay for your class, then you get penalized. Or fake references. That's my other big one, is if you're referencing a lot of things that just patently don't exist, I don't really care if you got it from AI or made it up somewhere else, that's a 0. But besides those kind of things, what we found is it's just raised our expectations. Every assessment is a attempt to measure some underlying understanding. And there's various different reasons why the assessment score might differ from the actual underlying understanding. There are things like, test taking anxiety or different things that can mean that the grade is lower than the actual understanding. And there are things that can mean the grade is higher than the understanding of cheating or getting, some insider information about what the test is going to involve. So there's always these things that measure that or can adjust that. AI, in our experience, has basically just changed that equation of an essay that I used to know represented B-level knowledge now represents maybe D-level knowledge, because I know AI could have made it look that much better than it does. So we raised our standards. So now what I would give it a B to, now I give a D to it, not just because I suspect you used AI, but because even if you didn't, you're not doing much better than what I could find, via AI. It's the equivalent of, your plot summary is no better than what I could have gotten copied off of Wikipedia. I wanted you to add your own insights, your own flavor. And so if it's not better than what's already out there, it doesn't matter if you copied it or not. It's just not accomplishing something. So I think that's the next thing that really feeds into that responsible use, is helping them understand, what are you adding on top of AI? What is your contribution beyond what someone could get out of just using this on its own?
Yeah, that's very interesting thought process of raising the standard, raising the bar. I like that. So you've talked a little bit about academic integrity, and in the chat, they've talked a little bit about some of the tools and maybe asked about some of the tools. And you mentioned that none of them are perfect, but we've mentioned Turnitin, and maybe talk a little bit about those detectors and how you use that.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think that, and yeah, it's none of them are perfectly accurate. And again, that's not, please don't email me angrily, anybody from any of these companies. That's not because they're turning out a bad product. It's just a fundamentally harder problem to solve, and always will be, and they will always be behind in the arms race around that. And so I don't tend to rely on that. I do think in some places it can be an interesting data point. So in our class, at least, we do have Turnitin enabled, mostly for plagiarism scans. So the big thing I'm usually concerned about with regard to integrity for my classes is not, did you use AI? Did you borrow a line from Wikipedia? What I care about is, did you get a bunch of assignments from someone who took the class last semester and you're reusing them? That's what I care most about, because that's custom fit to our class. You know what grade it got, everything like that. So that's what I care more about, and that's why we started using Turnitin when they made it so that you didn't have to add your student papers to a public repository when you did that. So we have it enabled because it's easy to do, and it's an interesting little data point of, okay, if I feel like this one has a lot of AI, and then I see that number is really high, it's kind of a cue to look for the kinds of things that we know AI is going to get wrong, and the kind of things that we know it's not going to be very deep on. For my assignments, at least, what AI tends to struggle with is it's never wrong. It's just never good either. It's very superficial. It's very high level. It's very generic. And so we try and write assignments that very deliberately ask you to go into some detail on a task. And if we see that high AI score and things like that, we know, okay, just look a little bit more closely for that detail. We're not grading for anything more carefully than we would, or not more carefully, anything that we weren't looking for otherwise. We just know it's the equivalent of, when the student, rushes into class at the last second and, thrusts their homework in on the table at the very last moment. Okay, maybe this is one I need to look at a little bit more closely because it can be pretty sloppy. Just those kind of indicators of various things like that. And it could still be a perfectly good essay. We've had those in the past. I will say, I advised a student project it was pretty early after ChatGPT came out, and their goal was to create a tool that you can just have running in your browser that just, as you navigate the web, it highlights AI generated content for you. And so it was pretty resource intensive, but it would just take the text from whatever you generated, send it over to Zero GPT and a couple of the others, and feed it back to you. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then I loaded one of my own papers, and it flagged most of the paper as being AI generated. And I'm like, I wrote this paper in 2013. I know this was not AI generated. I categorically know this is not AI generated. And so it was really an indicator of why it struggles and why we can't necessarily trust it. But I'm also aware my writing style is very AI-like. And I think that's just because AI learned from a wide variety of different sources. Some of the things that people have said are little giveaways of AI usage is excessive uses of M dashes, which I excessively use M dashes, and the use of the word delve for whatever reason. And I use the word delve a lot, or at least I used to. I've got an association now where every time I start to write, I'm like, oh no, someone's going to think this is AI. So I think it is indicative of why that's a challenge. So I think we have to be more holistic about it. We have to have things that, even if you're going to use the scanner as kind of a data point, there has to be more to it. I would never send a case to our Office of Student Integrity, pardon my cat, based only on an AI indicator, because I know they're not that reliable. But it can still be an interesting additional point when you're aware of other things. One thing I do recommend to faculty, and in fact, we're working on a way to do this in an even more streamlined kind of way, is run your own assignments through AI and see the kind of answers it gives. Not to penalize people who write similar answers, but just because then you know what kind of strengths it's going to have in that area. When we did that, what we noticed was we had an assignment that was basically pick a video game and apply these lessons to that video game. It was like, what kind of mistakes students made. And before, we would see a lot of a decent amount of variation, because we have, it's a fairly adult audience that grew up with video games. So we'd see a lot of Mario Kart and a lot of variety. Once ChatGPT came out, we started to see a lot of Pac-Man, a lot of Tetris, more than we had seen before. And this was while the age of our average student was going down, not up. And so if it was a case of, our average age, we were getting more students who grew up with Pac-Man and Tetris, that would be one thing. But we were seeing our average age decline, But suddenly all of these students seem to really like using Tetris and Pac-Man as their examples. That just was kind of an indicator. And again, we don't penalize them and say, don't use Pac-Man, but it just lets us know, look a little bit more in depth. And if AI, if we've looked at the AI solutions that use Pac-Man before, look at the kind of things that it's getting right and wrong, and look for those in these new solutions.
So you're saying that AI likes Pac-Man and Tetris.
Yes.
That's interesting. The old school games.
Right.
Well, David, we probably have time for one more question here. And one of the things that's been talked about a lot in the chat is people have been talking about grading and how they might use AI to help them grade. So maybe speak to that and how you can use it as a grading assistant and still comply with privacy policies.
Yeah, and I saw Mark's comment over in the chat as well that I agree with completely, that, yeah, we talk about students using cut and paste, but we do it a lot as well. I do think it's the case that some of what we do can be actually, prudent, because if we're in a situation where I'm aware that a lot of students make this mistake, and that tells me it's worth my time to spend some time really writing a good explanation for that mistake, because it's going to impact a lot more people. If there's something that only one student got wrong, then it might just not be worth quite as much time to spend a lot of time on that, because the impact is lower. Where I really think, though, that AI can have a big role in this going forward is as that grading assistant in that same kind of way. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think the same principle applies. So for us, the forum we use is called Ed Discussions, from a company called EdSTEM. And they recently added the ability to just build an AI bot that gives me, as the instructor, the ability to click a button and say, generate the AI response to this question. And it's given to me. It's not posted directly to the student. It's not done automatically. It just gives me something that I can say, okay, here's what the AI would say. The thing about it is that the AI has been trained on, or can be trained on, our own past answers. And for my classes, we've taught them for several years for thousands of students. And so there's a lot of past answers. And so it has a lot of knowledge to draw from. And the knowledge it's drawing from is me. It's my answers. It's my TA's answers. It's authentic to us. It's not just, what's I drew from the Wikipedia article on this topic. It is true for us. It's true for our class. And so it equips us with some information that we still vet. We still make sure it's still accurate and everything like that. It's still authentic in the sense of it's still coming from, there's still a person in the loop. There's a person looking at the answer and tweaking it and modifying it and approving it. But it makes it a lot faster to do and a lot faster to write good answers. Where I'm really excited about it is something that I just noticed about myself is, now that I know the things that I write will inform these future answers that it generates, I write better answers. Because it used to be a case of, here's a really great question from a student. I'm going to write a great question or a great answer. And I come back later and no one ever opened the thread again. I'm like, well, why did I spend all that time when the student wasn't even come back and look at my answer? Now I have the answer of, well, maybe they didn't, but that answer is now there in the AI's database. I trained the AI on this kind of question. And future David, when future David is answering a similar question, will have this AI assistant who's going to draw from current David's answer. And so it really embodies what I like about online education, which is that you're constantly building a big library, a big data set, a big body of content that you're always adding to. It's not re-delivering the same lecture and maybe updating a little bit over time. It's building something and putting new things in all the time. It takes that to even some of the things that are historically more transactional. So that's all on the forum side. But the same principle applies on the AI grading side. If I have a grading assistant, if I have something like this, and as I'm grading, I write a really good explanation for some misconception, and I get to another assignment later that has the same one, my AI assistant can just bring back some of my my prior feedback. It still came from me. It's still authentic in that way. It's just streamlining my own kind of use. And in a lot of ways, it's not dissimilar from the streamlining that happened when we went from writing letters to writing emails. That email made the same kind of communication, the same content a lot faster. And as a result, we did it a lot more and it developed its own norms, but it reduced the friction. So whereas, I probably could have written letters to a few dozen people a day, I can email with hundreds of people per day. I don't want to, but I can. This just takes that to an additional, extreme of I can evaluate a lot more students' assignments by having this kind of support and feedback. Where I really want to see it though, and this is kind of my big soapbox about learning at scale and AI and education, everything like that, is all the time we save by using these kind of tools is time we can reinvest into the things that the tools can't use. So if it's a case of, historically I can either, if I have a class of 50 people and I'm the only one grading it, then if I make grading 5 times faster, for example, and free up 8 hours a week or however much our format would say that's 10 hours a week to teach a class that size. So I free up 8 hours a week. I could just bank that 8 hours and use it somewhere else. Or I could reinvest that 8 hours into saying, now that I'm able to do this more efficiently, let's have more assignments that require a little bit more nuance. Let's have more discussions. The way I run my classes, honestly, and this is built mostly on the fact that I have fantastic teams of teaching assistants. 95% of what I do during the semester is answer students' questions on the forum, interact with them, chat with them, the stuff that I think we as teachers like to do. And it's allowed me to reinvest that time that I spent on the class into that kind of stuff instead of into, checking for reliability across something or redelivering the same lecture. So it really has allowed us to commodify some of this stuff that we then channel into reusing that time for things that we still need that time to do. I think that's something we really have to prioritize. It would be so easy to use the efficiency gains from some of these technologies to just reach more students at the same level. I think we have the opportunity to use it to reach more students, but improve the experience at the same time instead of just reaching more students for the same level of investment.
Wow, that's great, David. I love that tie-in of being able to reach more students. That's great. So thank you so much for joining us today. This has been awesome. So many great insights, thoughts, even practical solutions and applications that we've heard today. So thank you very much. I do want to remind everyone, if you didn't click at the beginning, go ahead and click. We're going to give you free access to Stukent's courseware and Simternships that are focused on AI right now and have been updated to include AI in those classrooms. So go ahead and click that and we'll give you that free instructor access just for attending today. Once again, David, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. A lot of great information. Thank you to every one of you for joining us today. We appreciate the comments that have been going in the chat that helped drive our discussion. And thank you everyone for submitting questions ahead of time and allowing us to have this great discussion today. So everybody have a great weekend and remember to stay current with Stukent. Thank you.